Hi everyone, this is Peter, and I'm going to talk in the last of this three-part series concerning Greek myth and philosophy, the ways in which Plato, or other ways in which Plato utilizes myth to get across some of the important points about his foundation, I guess, for understanding truth, understanding real reality, the really real. We saw from the last video that it appears in the allegory of the cave that Plato is somewhat ironically using a fictional story in a, as it says, a strange sort of cave and strange prisoners to get across his notions of how somebody might be educated to learn the truth. And so again, there's this kind of ironic contradiction of the elevation of logos over mythos and then getting the mythos right back in there to tell the story. And so that implied irony, one could argue, depending on your viewpoint, either enhances or undermines the gist of Plato's argument. However, elsewhere in the Republic, arguments are made that are much more explicit in terms of the utility of myth. And this turns to one of the central problems of the Republic, which is it can be considered a kind of refutation of the idea of democracy that had arisen in Athens over the years. Democracy, which I think Plato would argue, especially after the death of Socrates in 399, had certainly failed to live up to its potential. So in the Republic, there's an argument for the replacement of democracy with a much more oligarchical rule by a class of educated citizens known as guardians. The guardians have a problem, of course, which is how do you, in essence, persuade the people you're ruling that your rule is legitimate and that they will, in fact, go along with your, with your plans, with your decrees, if it comes to that. And that's a really good question. Force of arms alone or laws alone won't do it. You need to, in a very real sense, internalize among the citizenry, among the populace, internalize a notion of superiority and inferiority, of, merit leading to elevation within a society. So in Book 3, it's kind of an interesting explicit laying out of the utility of myth in the so-called noble lie, where we have this, the discussion kind of opens with a description of the guardians. So the word guardian in the fullest sense ought to be applied to this higher class, right, who will preserve us against foreign enemies and maintain peace at home. The young men whom we before called the guardians may be more properly designated auxiliaries and supporters of the principles of the rulers. So we're basically talking about, how would you inculcate younger people into the mores and the system of the Republic? Well, in essence, right away, we have this very interesting line. How may we devise one of those needful falsehoods of which we lately spoke? Just one royal lie which may deceive the rulers and at any rate the rest of the cities. So this kind of interesting, our overarching conspiracy theory, one that will have to be told to the rulers. The rulers will have to believe it. This is a kind of an intriguing possibility. I mean, how would we tell people, the people who are supposed to have the intellect and the wisdom and the virtue, a story that will, basically justify their positions in society. So here's basically what it looks like, that specific lie. Nothing new, I replied, only an old Phoenician tale of what has often occurred before now in other places. As the poets say, remember the poets are really not supposed to be in the Republic, a sort of very famous law or decree, declaration, argument, whatever that Plato makes, though not in our time. And I don't know whether such an event could ever happen again or could now even be made probable if it did. Again, that sense of, critiquing and thinking about myth is present here. How your words seem to hesitate on your lips. You will not wonder, I replied, on my hesitation when you've heard. Speak, he said, and fear not. Well, then I will speak, though I really know not how to look you in the face or what words to utter. The audacious fiction which I propose to communicate gradually, first to rulers, then to soldiers, lastly to the people. They are to be told that their youth was a dream, and the education and training which they received from us an appearance only. In reality, during all that time, they were being formed and fed in the womb of the earth. Again, that allusion to the cave seems to be kind of a consistent one here, maybe. Where they themselves and their arms and appurtenances were manufactured. And when they were completed, the earth, their mother sent them up. And so their country, being their mother and also their nurse, they're bound to advise for her good and defend her against attacks. And their citizens they are to regard as children of the earth and their own brothers. So in essence, the idea that you have this kind of city and the government, everything basically coming out of this one place, or they are aboriginal, indigenous, autochthonous, and so you have that sense of basically being bound to the place from which literally you were made. The interlocutor replies, "You had good reason," he said, "to be ashamed of the lie which you were going to tell." In other words, this is fantastic. This doesn't correspond to empirical experience, but no matter. The tale continues. And so it continues not merely to justify the existence of the society as a kind of organic outgrowth of the earth, but then that aspect of hierarchy and rank upon which the Republic replies so much is explicated in more detail. "True," I reply, "but there's more coming. I've only told you half. Citizens, we shall say to them in our tale, you are all brothers, i.e. of common point of origin, yet God has framed you differently." So God, right, that aspect perhaps of divine agency is being played out here. God has framed you differently. Some of you have power of command. The composition of these he's mingled gold, wherefore also they have the greatest honor. But others he's made of silver to be auxiliaries, and others again who are to be husbandmen and craftsmen he's composed of brass and iron. The species will generally be preserved in the children, so the characteristics pass themselves down through the generations. And the sense of a kind of natural order echoed in the sort of hierarchy of the elements is made pretty explicit here. But as all are of the same original stock, a golden parent sometimes will have a silver son, or a silver parent a golden son. And God, again, God, nature, natural organic order here, proclaims as a first principle to the rulers, and above all else, that there's nothing which they should so anxiously guard, or of which they are to be such good guardians, as the purity of the race. In chilling words indeed, given especially the 20th century. They should observe what elements mingle in their offspring. If the son of a golden or silver parent has an admixture of brass and iron, nature orders a transposition of ranks, and the eye of the ruler must not be pitiful toward the child, because he has to descend in the scale and become a husbandman or artisan, just as there may be sons of artisans who, having an admixture of gold or silver, are raised to honor, and so forth. For an oracle says that when a man of brass or iron guards the state, it will be destroyed. Is such a fiction credible? Yes, in a future generation, not in the present. Such is the tale. Is there any possibility of making our citizens believe in it? Which is a great question. In other words, is the foundation of a society actually located in reason, rationality, intellectual rigor, and study, or is it indeed the byproduct of persuasion by means of rhetoric and mythology? Do we need to consider the kinds of issues in terms of distributing what in essence would be propaganda among the citizens of the Republic to make the story stick and to justify, in a kind of superstitious or traditional sense, the superiority of so-called gold or silver individuals? This is pretty depressing stuff. And indeed, as the dialogue continues, right? Not the present generation. They're not going to believe it. They'll, throw it out. It's obviously manufactured. Their sons might be made to believe, or their sons' sons. And again, the interlocutor says, I see the difficulty, yet the fostering of such a belief will make them care more. And this dialogue continues, care more essentially for the republic, the state, and defend it in a kind of much more devout, and to take that crime that Socrates was accused of, pious kind of manner, one that isn't really embedded in reason, analysis, or really logos of any kind. So that is a major question that the Republic probably really presents with no clear solution, how to create the ideal city in the face, basically, of the stubborn human desire to believe in stories. Another, we'll just take a few minutes to look at one very famous myth that also emerges in the Republic, and that is the myth of Err, E-R. And it's really much too long to go into, to quote from extensively, and it's pretty complicated. But in essence, what is being argued here is going to be the desire for the virtuous life based upon the existence of the soul and the transmigration of the soul after death. So you have this situation, Plato arguing that the human soul is indeed immortal, originates in the realm of the forms, a kind of heaven, falls from that heaven, descends into the material world, and then, being trapped in material circumstances, aspires to rise once more to its point of origin. Think again of dialogues like the Symposium and the Phaedo and so forth. So in essence, you have a myth told of a soldier who was apparently killed in battle and is in this kind of comatose state, I guess is how best to describe it, where his soul goes off to the afterworld, and in this kind of indeterminate realm where souls essentially wait for judgment. And there are definitely some interesting commonalities between this and other, again, the Egyptian Book of the Dead or the Hindu tradition of reincarnation. So as it's described here, and I'm going to actually borrow again from Harris and Platzner, their description of this is quite good. After spending a lot of time either in heaven or a place of torment, so heaven and hell, and these are things we see, by the way, in the Odyssey. We'd love to spend more time in the underworld there for sure. Souls reassemble in a plane or meta where their fates are decided. And so you start seeing your future fate determined by, in essence, again, echoing that Indian theme, basically karma. A good example there, Orpheus decides to become a swan. Odysseus returns as an ordinary person. In Plato's universe, the gods, symbols of perfect virtue, are not responsible for human folly, wickedness, the suffering it brings, but souls freely adopt their own destinies. So basically what the myth here is trying to argue for to any readers or listeners is that virtue does in fact affect one's destiny on a kind of eternal time scale, that it makes virtue attractive not merely for its own sake or as a it's a kind of aspect of rationality, but that there is somewhere out in there a system of rewards and punishments, and the fate of your soul is going to be determined by the actions you take in this world. Again, strange stuff for a philosopher who's trying to set up an ideal city based on rationality, enforcing justice, and making things work well. So this is just one example. There are numerous others, and in a short recording like this, I certainly can't take the time to go into all of them, but the fact of the matter is, by the time we come into the 5th century, and certainly by the 4th century, Greek myth is now distancing itself from the thoughts and studies and what have you of the intellectual class. It's being seen as something to be studied, something to be analyzed, indeed something to be manipulated at will, as the examples I've taken from Plato indicate.